Good evening, everyone. Glad to have you all here. I'm Jack Titchener, the Interim Director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. It's wonderful to have you out here on this kind of dreary evening, but we're going to have a good time tonight. It's wonderful that our honored guest, Governor Jim Edgar, has been able to make it here and help us celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. We have some opening remarks from our president, Dr. Randy Dunn.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. It's so wonderful to see friends and folks associated with this university who sometimes we don't get here for every event, but for something of this stature, certainly look forward to the opportunity to come join in for a great evening celebrating the Institute. With all of the events and activities that go on as sponsored by the Institute, typically I get approached about these things and are given three choices. And sometimes, Jack, it's Carol that does this, sometimes Delio. But we can come in and Rhonda and I sit at the back and don't say anything. That's one choice. The second choice is we can be here and I can get recognized. Stand up and wave. The third choice is they allow me to come up and say a word or two. But then Carol always says, 2 minutes. So tonight I took the opportunity to claim a couple of minutes on the front end and beyond just welcoming you to the university to share a couple of things. And the reason I grabbed the time, you'll see in a moment. The first thing for me is a point of personal privilege. When the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute started 20 years ago, I was still a relatively young faculty member here at SIU Carbondale. I was in, at that time, the College of Education. And being a native Illinoisan, certainly knew well of the state, knew well of Paul Simon, but as one of those new faculty members, had the opportunity on occasion to come over to sessions that were being held, get involved in some of the work of the Institute. On one occasion, I know we did a conference on year-round schooling, which was really exciting, and I was involved in that. And I'll tell you what, as a younger faculty member, still fairly new to this institution, that was something that for me, and I don't want to get over the top in explaining it, but that was something for me that was a life changer. As a prof, to come in and be involved in those types of undertakings, that type of work, was just amazing to me to think that I was part of that. And some of you will remember this in the room. We had an event that Paul was hosting through the Institute, and a number of individuals were in attendance from Paul's Senate days. And don't ask me how this happened, but somehow I got sat at a lunch table with Senator Simon, Senator Alan Cranston, Senator Richard Lugar, and I thought, surely I'm at the wrong table. And Paul said, no, stay here, it's fine. And again, the opportunity that exists for students, professors, policymakers, elected officials, all of us coming through the strength of this institute, it's pretty hard to describe, and you being here tonight is testimony to that, so thank you. The second element that caused me to claim my time, that I know I'm already over, sorry Carol, wherever you are, was given that our guest speaker tonight is Governor Edgar, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. And many of you in the room know this, so it's not new news to you. But as we're experiencing all that's going on in our beloved state of Illinois right now, the challenges in front of us due to the budget, due to the political stalemate, the impasse that is taking place, it's probably appropriate to remember back about 20 plus years ago. And I look at so many people here who were with the institutions at the time, my bosses, and we go back to those years, 93, 94, Governor, where when we took the overall national survey of the strength of the state's public university systems, do you know where the Illinois public higher education system sat. Now, you can get in a debate with Dr. Howler, he's in the room somewhere, or others, but we will all agree that we were clearly in the top 5 nationally, and depending on who you ask, we might have been the top 2 or top 3. The California systems always made the list in those days, UCal and Cal State systems. Wisconsin, of course. SUNY, of course. Other good state collections of universities, Maryland comes to mind. But you know, always in that group of state public higher education systems, top 3, top 4, top 5, was Illinois. And now we're in a position where it's not just, in 22, 23 months of the budget standoff, it's not just where we're working around the edges, Chancellor, to figure out how to save $21 million in the first go-around. Now we're talking about dismantling pieces of our universities. So I remember Governor Edgar, I was, of course, a school superintendent, professor during his tenure. You were the education governor, and we can look back and we see that. And we have Governor Edgar right now, if you followed this at all. You know, we have Governor Edgar out there advocating very strongly, once again, for the public higher education system in the state of Illinois. The president, sometimes we're not always profiles in courage. And sometimes it's tough to say truth to power, but Governor Edgar has picked up the mantle for us on that, and we've been hearing it, and we appreciate it, Governor. Thank you for taking it on. So again, thank you all for being here. I know I've more than claimed my time, but I appreciate the opportunity to share that, and it gives me great pleasure at this time to welcome to the podium for also a word or two of greeting, Interim Chancellor Brad Caldwell. Brad, thank you.
Per usual, Dr. Dunn stole all my good lines, but it's no fun following a high-profile, good speaker. But let me say this, today is a great day. It's a great day to celebrate SIU. SIU is a great place to be, even when we're wet. And we're going to stay wet for a little while longer, maybe. But I'll tell you, thank you for being here. We have reason to celebrate tonight, 20 great years. And you say, 20 years of what? Well, I'll tell you where you can find out what. And I'll take my point of personal privilege now. Matt Bauman, where are you, Matthew? Okay, Matthew's back here. Matthew is my chief of staff, for lack of a better term, even though he holds a loftier title. And I pay him lots of money. I'm kidding. Just making sure he's listening. But when you look on Matthew's wall, you see Loretta Scott King, you see Walter Cronkite, you see Barbara Bush, on and on. You saw Fidel Castro. And I see some Cubs pictures, but we won't count those. But you know, one picture, and you obviously said a number of pictures of Paul, obviously, as well. But I will tell you, pictures that I see over and over is Matthew with Jim Edgar, Matthew with Mike Lawrence, over and over again. Yesterday, Matthew was in my office. And he stood up and took a call, and I thought, that's rude, you shouldn't do that. And he said, yes, Governor. It's like, yeah, all right, I lose. So, and I, just for the record, I said, which governor's calling? And he clarified, And he said the right words, so it was okay, good. But you know, the Policy Institute, think about the policy that's truly been shaped over the last 20 years. Think about the polls that have been put out. When you think about the impact that it has made because of one man who had I don't want to say had a dream, but I don't want to steal a line here, but he did. He had a vision. He knew what we could do here in Southern Illinois, and he knew as an elected official he could help sway public opinion. And he could sway it not only through written or spoken word, but written word. Then you have, again, Mr. Lawrence here, who's the king of the newspaper. David Yepsen, king of the newspaper. And John Jackson, he just writes up a storm and he's still writing. All of these prolific authors, and there are many more. I didn't mean to leave anyone out there. But think of the impact that this institute has. It really does. And that's kind of the public that you see, kind of the public side, but there's also a private, or not a private, but a behind-the-scenes aspect to the Institute as well. That's really impressive. When you see the interns that these folks put out, when you see the different fellows that they've put out, and Linda Baker and the good work that she does up in Springfield, and there's just so many other folks. And the network that you see, it really is impressive, folks. Do not ever shortchange this Institute, because it is truly an impact player in not only Illinois policy, but I truly believe national policy. So we owe the Institute a great debt of gratitude, not only for 20 years that way, but hopefully 20 plus a whole lot more going this way. Very excited about the future. Thank you to the Simon family for what they've done just to allow us to get this far. Appreciate that very much, and I'll tell you, once again, can't underestimate the impact they have on this campus. And again, I'll harken back to one more good Matthew story. I asked him, I said, Matthew, I said, who's one of the top people who've had an influence in your life? And he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and then, I said, so other than your family. And it was interesting who he said, because there are people who are sitting right here. And so don't think for a second that this Institute, and I'll say it again, has not made a profound impact, because even if you've done nothing else, this Institute has helped mold and shaped a chief of staff for me that's a good man, an honest man, and if you keep up that kind of work, you can keep putting out good folks. So anyway, thank you all so much for what you've done here at this Institute, and I'm very excited to see you all here in support of this. And with that, I'm done, but again, great 20 years. Thanks much.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Not long after I came on board as the interim director here at the Institute, John Jackson and I started talking about ideas on celebrating the 20th anniversary. First name that came to mind was Jim Edgar. First off, as many of you know in this room, Governor Edgar was literally present at the beginning on September 19th, 1995, a sunny day, by the way, when he signed the official documents that formally launched the Institute at a ceremony with Paul and Jean Simon outside Shryock Auditorium. I want to acknowledge some of the folks here tonight who had a hand in that process. My dear friend and colleague John Jackson, who along with former Mass Communication and Media Arts Dean Joe Foote, actually authored the original proposal to start the Institute. Also important to the proposal's success were former Vice President for Academic Affairs at SIU, John Haller, and John Yopp, the former Dean of the Graduate School. Mike Lawrence, of course, who was Senior Advisor and Press Secretary to Governor Edgar and served as Paul's first Associate Director and later served as Director after Paul's passing. When you think about the state's leading politicians in the latter part of the 20th century, two people come to mind for a lot of the same reasons. Paul Simon and Jim Edgar both share a lot of the same qualities that made them very effective leaders for this state. Honesty, intelligence, integrity, vision, discipline, hard work, and a willingness to effectively work across party lines in the best interest of the people of Illinois. One of the best resources on the subject is a book called The Illinois Governors, Mostly Good and Competent. It's a great read. Needs to be updated. The section... Careful, Jack, you could be making a career decision here. The section on our 38th governor sums him up quite nicely. Jim Edgar was the right governor at the right time. When he took office in 1991, he inherited what was then the largest deficit in state history and made hundreds of millions of dollars in very difficult budget cuts. He eliminated a $1 billion backlog in unpaid health care bills. I was there. I saw those first days of the Edgar administration. He had some tough work. By the time he left office in 1999, he left his successor an unprecedented $1.5 billion in surplus. Think of that. It's amazing. When Governor Edgar left office, the Chicago Tribune said, "His instincts and motives were sound as any of those that the state has ever had." Since retirement, he's continued his commitment to be a person who advocates responsible government as a distinguished fellow at the University of Illinois' Institute of Government and Public Affairs. He leads the Edgar Fellows Program there, a terrific program which brings together emerging leaders from all parts of Illinois to foster statesmanship to address major challenges across regional, partisan, and ethnic lines. It is indeed an honor and a privilege tonight to introduce the 38th Governor of the state of Illinois, the Honorable Jim Edgar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack, for the introduction. President Dunn and distinguished officials at SIU, friends of SIU, and just good people. I'm delighted to be back on campus. I've had the opportunity many times to be down here at Southern, and particularly to be down for activities that the Simon Institute put on, and always enjoyed it very much. I was thinking back to the almost 22 years ago now, on that beautiful fall afternoon when I came down to Southern to join then Senator Paul Simon and then SIU President Ted Sanders on making the announcement that Paul was coming to SIU and setting up the Simon Institute. Now, I was very happy because I think it's extremely important in the academic world that we have some practical information delivered as well, and particularly when it comes to government and politics. I think academic credentials and discipline is good, theory is good, but you also have to have some understanding of the practical realities. And I thought this is really good for Southern, that Paul's going to be here and these students are going to have that opportunity. But I have to tell you, I also had some reservations because I've seen the academic institutions, and they do good work, they mean well, but they usually don't have that much of an impact on the public sector. And I had hopes for the Simon Institute. I actually didn't know that day that Paul was going to steal my press secretary, Mike Lawrence, and bring him down here too. Might have been a different announcement that day. But I have to tell you, after 20 years, the Simon Institute has far exceeded any hopes I had for its success. And in many ways. Some have been mentioned, and I'll reiterate some of them. First, in the development of public policy, it's tough to have an impact on making public policy. I mean, it's not the most rational process in Springfield where public policy is made. You've got to understand it. You've got to know how to work with that. The Simon Institute has demonstrated time and time again that they're up to that task. One of the first proposals they had an influence on was in campaign finance reform, which I had the opportunity as governor to come down and to sign that legislation that had started down here in the Simon Institute and then was taken to the halls of Springfield and made into public policy. And that's happened time and time again since that first occasion back in the late 1990s. In healthcare, the Simon Institute's had a major impact in helping rural health care in Illinois, in seeing that thousands of needy children in southern Illinois get dental care, even in allowing retired doctors who want to volunteer their time to be able to do that and not have to worry about being sued. So in public policy, the Institute has been very successful. Perhaps even more important, though, the impact it's had on young people. Because I think the key to the future of this state is our young people.
And if we're going to have a good state, we have to have good young people who are motivated to be willing to provide their time for public service, to be involved in the development of public policy. And the Simon Institute has resulted in hundreds of SIU students being part of that process. Been mentioned about the internship program. It's had its impact. Many of the graduates from SIU that's been involved in the Simon Institute have gone on in full-time government service, particularly in Springfield, in both the legislative and executive branch of government. Now, some haven't given full-time, but they've been involved in the process. They volunteered in helping their local communities as well as their state, and some at the national level. So again, the Simon Institute has realized, far exceeding my hopes back those almost 22 years ago, in having an impact. Also, it's been mentioned that they continue to generate all kinds of papers, research, but it's practical research. It's not something that the academic world send to the politicians we put on a shelf someplace and never read. There's much of that, I can tell you. But this is information that politicians really want to read, information that public policy makers need, and I commend them for that. Also, talking back with students, the thousands of high school students they've brought to Carbondale to take part in the Youth Government Day. You never know, one of those students, just from that few hours on campus, very well could be the spark that's going to produce the next governor of the state of Illinois, or produce someone who's going to go on and provide great service to the public because of that interest that started in that one day on the campus at SIU. The last thing that, and it's been also mentioned here tonight, that always impresses me, you know, Carbondale's not the easiest place in the world to get to. As I drove down today from Springfield during the rainstorm. And that's not a direct route yet. But the Simon Institute has been able to bring dozens and dozens, not only of state leaders, national leaders, even world leaders, to Carbondale. And those people have been able to share their thoughts and insights with the students here. But not only the students, but with many of the people of Southern Illinois who've taken advantage of the Simon Institute and show up for these type of gatherings. It always impressed me. I have to tell you, I hope if there's any reports, don't report this part. All my time at Champaign, I have never seen the turnouts for public affairs forums like I see down here that the Simon Institute put on. And I've never seen, first of all, you can't find a parking place in Champaign-Urbana to show up to something. But I've never seen the turnout of citizens in the community or students, except when we had Barack Obama, when he was running for the United States Senate. That's when I knew then, this guy's a rock star. That's the only time I had a huge crowd turnout. But again, that wouldn't have been possible without the Simon Institute bringing those people in and giving you that opportunity and the students that opportunity. But also, equally important, they came to Carbondale. They came to Southern Illinois. And that's really important. I can tell you as someone who was involved in government for many years, you remembered where you had been. You remembered where you went in a campaign. You remembered what towns you were in. So when somebody brought up those issues affecting that community or that region of the state, you'd been there, you knew that. So I can't minimize or over-exaggerate how important it is to have folks come to Carbondale, to come to SIU, to come to Southern Illinois. That's going to stick in their mind. So just in a whole list of ways, the Simon Institute has done a great job. Under the leadership and the vision of Paul Simon, and then Mike Lawrence, and most recently David Yepsen, this institute has served SIU, state of Illinois, the people of Southern Illinois, excellent, better than anyone could have ever hoped for. And I'm sure someplace up there, wherever Paul is, he's looking down tonight, and he's extremely proud what this institute has done. But also knowing Paul Simon, he's not going to dwell too much on the accomplishments. I'm sure he's saying, all right, now what are we going to do the next 20 years? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. In a little bit, we're going to have some microphones out there for people to ask questions. I'm going to start with kind of a breaking news question, though. The U.S. House, of course, earlier today passed the American Health Care Act, and that raises some serious concerns over the impact to around 650,000 Illinoisans who are covered under the Medicaid expansion of the Affordable Care Act, and there are another 350,000 or so who are in the individual market. As you look at this from the standpoint of someone who's led the state's Medicaid program and grappled with some very difficult decisions, what do you see as the key issues for the state of Illinois, and what kind of advice you hope to give Washington on this?
I've stopped giving advice to Springfield. I've never tried to give advice to Washington. And I'll just say before people get too worried, and I think there is a lot of worry about what's going to happen to their health care, a lot of uncertainty. This is a bill that everybody's thought was going to come out of the House pretty easily, and it took a lot of difficulties to get it out. And I don't know of anyone, again, you never know what might happen, to think it's going to pass the U.S. Senate. So I hope nobody will, get too exercised yet. But saying that, you just never know. Medicaid, to a lot of folks, don't understand it. That is the 800-pound gorilla when you talk about the Illinois state budget. It was when I was governor, it still is, and if for some way this passed, it would be even more so. Back when I was governor, in between my two terms when I was running for re-election, I took a couple weeks recess to have quadruple bypass surgery on my heart. And I would have said at least one of those bypasses I dedicated to Medicaid, because that is what, when we grappled with the budget, that's what most of what we grappled with was, how do you deal with Medicaid funding? How do you provide the necessary funding to provide quality medical care to the needy? And also, the federal government told us how to do it, but if you know, in Illinois, we only received 50%, at least then, of what we had to spend from the federal government. We got less than any other state because we were a wealthy state. So Medicaid is an extremely important issue. It's a very difficult issue. I don't, even after the 8 years as governor, and a lot of things have changed since then, claim to understand it. But anytime they start messing around with Medicaid, just understand that's going to mean the potential of not millions, but billions of dollars just for the state of Illinois. And so I hope, whatever they might end up doing, that the governors will be able to have input in this policy, because this has a huge impact on the ability of state government to meet its financial needs. And the more money we have to divert to Medicaid because they make a mistake in Washington, the less money we're going to have for education, the less money we're going to have for conservation, the less money we're going to have for corrections. You go up and down the list. It has a huge impact. So I would just urge those people in Washington to be extremely careful and listen to what the governors have to say about messing with Medicaid, because it has huge ramifications, not only on the people who need the help, but on the entire state that has to pay for it.
You've negotiated budgets with Mike Madigan, both as Speaker and that 2-year interregnum when he was the minority leader when Lee Daniels was Speaker. What was the secret to cutting a deal with him to get a budget passed, and why is it so elusive today?
Well, I mentioned about this quadruple bypass surgery. I dedicated one to Medicaid. I dedicated one to Mike Madigan. Madigan, I think, to be very truthful, I think he has been overly maligned by the news media and maybe my party the last few years now. He should be maligned a little bit, but I think they've gone overboard. He is not the problem. He might be a little bit of the problem, but he is not the big problem here. Mike Madigan can be extremely difficult to negotiate with. He has the patience of Job. He'll try to outweight you. And he's not the governor. He's not the person that has to get things done. Contrary to what a lot of people think, the Speaker of the House is not the most powerful person in Illinois government. Even a weak governor has far more power than the Speaker does. Not weak, there isn't a weak governor. Illinois is a strong governor state. Even a somewhat incompetent governor has more power than Mike Madigan. But you got to have the Speaker if you're going to get things done. The Founding Fathers set up a divided government. They didn't give the governor complete power. The governor is the most powerful, but he's not all powerful. And you've got to get things through the legislature. And I will say, there is no more competent legislator in my lifetime, and I was a legislator, than Mike Madigan. He is the most focused, disciplined individual I've ever had to deal with. And he can be extremely frustrating. But I got to tell you, at the end of the day, and we always, at the end of the day, sometimes it took a little extra time, but we reached a compromise. And that's the essence of democracy, particularly when you have a split government. You have to reach a consensus. You don't get it all your way. Mike Madigan doesn't get it all his way. You have to reach a compromise. And my experience with Mike Madigan was, you know, it took a lot longer than I wanted, but we could usually reach that consensus. Now, dealing with him, one thing I always tried to do, it never was personal. In fact, I enjoyed Mike Madigan. We actually have similarities. We're introverts. We're not guys that hang out at the bars in Springfield. You know, we usually went back to our respective homes or his apartment and read and, you know, went to bed at a reasonable hour and got up at a reasonable hour. So we had a lot in common as far as individuals, but he could be exasperating. But as I said, at the end of the day, we could usually work out. One thing I never wanted to make it personal, never made any public utterance questioning him personally. Sometimes I said, we disagree. I think that's a mistake, but it wasn't personal. I never questioned his honesty, and I never really had any concern about that. And the other thing, most important, you never want to mislead Mike Madigan. You never want him to think you lied to him. The most important probably factor in dealing in Springfield, and I can't speak for Washington, I haven't been there, but is your word. And particularly old-timers, if they thought you had lied to them, that's it. Mike Madigan had difficulties dealing with Rod Blagojevich because he felt Rod Blagojevich lied to him. And he pretty well writes you off at that point. So you want to be very candid and honest with Mike. You're going to have to be patient. You don't want to make it personal. When I went, my first year as governor, some of you in this room are old enough to remember, not many, but some. I had barely got elected. I mean, we didn't know till the next day I'd won the election. I had a Democratic-controlled legislature. They were not happy that I was there. Not so much that they liked their guy, but that was redistricting year. And all the legislature really cares about is redistricting. That draws the lines. And I messed it up for the Democrats because I wasn't a Democrat. I was going to veto their bill that they were going to pass, which they passed, and I vetoed it. So, you know, I started out, it was a difficult year. Madigan had told some people he was going to teach me a lesson. I was the new kid, and he was going to show me. And we went through several months at a stalemate. Again, never let it be personal. We went into overtime, which hadn't happened up to that point in a long time. I had him down at the office every day for lunch. We always kept communications. We never let it go without a day or two, even when we were at an impasse, without talking. And he was very gracious. He'd always come down to my office. I'd say, "Come down, you're the governor." He'd come down, and we'd have lunch. Mike Madigan is the cheapest date in Illinois. All all you have to do is give him an apple. That's all he wants. And he'd sit and eat the apple, and I'd sit there and eat, after I had my heart issues, my buffalo burgers and those things that didn't taste very good. And we'd say, how are we going to get out of this mess? How are we both going to get off the limb? And, usually after several discussions, we'd come up with a compromise. Now, my best, and this is a long answer, but I enjoy talking. I don't get to talk much anymore. Nobody listens to me. But this is back to that 1994. We did not have a budget, and I took this little absence from Springfield to go have heart surgery. And I remember I'm talking to the doctor. He says, you need open heart surgery. And I didn't have a budget. And I said, okay, you're going to do this tonight. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, can I get on the telephone? He looked at me and he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I've got the 4 leaders coming into my office tomorrow in Chicago because we got this budget impasse. And if I'm going to have open heart surgery, I'm going to leverage it for everything I can. And he said, well, yeah, by 12 o'clock, you ought to be able to get on the phone. So next morning, 11 o'clock, they had a tube in my mouth, and I was in intensive care, and they pulled the tube out. And so I'm trying to get my voice back, and I said, all right, it's 12 o'clock. They had a phone there, and I called my secretary who was in my office in Chicago, and I said, are the 4 leaders in the office? Yeah. And we told the lieutenant governor he needed to come. We didn't tell him the night before why, because I wasn't sure how this operation was going to go. And we didn't let anybody know. There was about 3 people in the state outside the doctors who knew this was happening. And we didn't want to announce it until everything had gone well. So they'd already announced it, but the lieutenant governor was in there, and she said, they're all in there. I said, put me on the squawk box. So they put me on there live, and I said, all right, guys, we're all out on the limb on this budget. And, we've all said things, and it's hard to back up. But now we've got an excuse. Most of the people in the state of Illinois, I heard this morning that I'm near death with open, because, back then they thought open heart surgery. They think this is a crisis. And I got to tell you, if we don't have a budget agreement in the next 2 hours, I'm going to beat you over the head with this. Madigan, smart guy. Right away, he got it. He knew, first of all, he was going to beat me. He was going to beat him over the. I was going to beat him over the head with this, and he knew he'd lose that battle. And he also knew, all right, we now have our reason to compromise. Nobody can complain because we got to come together. The governor is near death, and we've got to solve this budget problem. Now, at the time, Emo Jones was the Senate leader. He wasn't as sure. In fact, he never believed that was me on the phone. To this day, he thinks that was somebody else. And he wasn't sure he wanted to do this. Well, Madigan said to the 2 Republicans and the lieutenant, excuse me, I'm going to take the Senate president and I need to go in the other room. And they said he went in the other room, and for about a half an hour they heard shouting and yelling and things. And finally they came back in, and the speaker said, we'll negotiate the budget. And within 2 hours, we had a budget agreement. 2 days later, they came out to the hospital room. I got a new robe put on. Still have that robe. It's the nicest robe I've ever had. My doctor bought it for me because I didn't have a robe. And so they all come out. We signed the budget, the TV, everybody leaves. I turned to my staff and said, I'm not doing this next year to get a budget. But I tell you the story because Madigan, he is reasonable. Now, he'll try to work it for all he can, but he knew at that point he was up against it. He wasn't going to win this battle. And so, we had that kind of relationship. My last 2 years as governor, this is after he had to sit out for 2 years and being a minority leader. He came back, he was a new man. He said, I'm going to work with the governor. I learned I cannot beat the governor. And he kept that word with me for 2 years, with George Ryan. He started that out with Rod Blagojevich, till Rod Blagojevich went off on some tangent. And he started that out with Bruce Rauner, I got to tell you. Both John Cullerton and Mike Madigan started out the Rauner administration, sitting down with him and working out a supplemental budget. They had to redo the 2015 budget, which was not balanced, wasn't a full year budget. And they did that within a month of Governor Rauner taking office. And I really thought, hey, this is going to work. Yeah, they're different parties, but they're reasonable folks. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened since. We've got off on some other tangents, unfortunately, and not concentrate on the budget. But Mike Madigan is not the bad person that he's made out to be. Is he difficult? Yes. Is he wrong? Yes, often. But it's not all his fault. And I found in my last 2 years as governor, I got to tell you, he was much more supportive of my efforts to balance the budget than my two Republican leaders were. I always used to tell the Republicans, the difference between you and the Democrats is they want to spend money, but at least they'll raise a tax to pay for it. You guys just want to spend money, not maybe for health care or for some of the things for the poor, but other things, but you don't want to raise the tax to pay for it. And often I had to rely on Madigan, and I were the only thing, particularly dealing with some of the union issues even, because he on fiscal matters, and again, he said, I'll work with you. Now, he wasn't going to work with me on certain labor issues. I knew that. But on the budget issue, at the end of the day, if you were willing to meet him halfway, you could get something done.
We're going to have folks come up and ask questions. We've got microphones at both sides. One quick question before, as folks can start queuing up now, and we appreciate that. I know you don't like to Monday morning quarterback these kinds of things, but you've been around the situation for a long time. You've enumerated some of the problems we have right now. What would be your advice to the governor and the four legislative leaders on trying to get us out of this mess?
First of all, stop making it personal. Don't run commercials and things. It's not a campaign. This is government, governing. And one of the problems you got to remember, you can be political up till Election Day, the day after that, and the way we used to work when Ken was down there. I mean, we'd fight on Election Day, and we'd fight sometime in a session, but at the end of the day, we knew we had to come together, and sometimes you had a hard time telling the Republicans from the Democrats on many issues. So you can't make this personal. You got to just drop that stuff. Even if you're thinking another, I got to tell you, I thought a lot of things about Mike Madigan. I'm a lot nicer to him now than I thought back then. Mike Lawrence can tell you that. But I never made it personal, never made it public. Never, you kept that to yourself. Second thing is, there is one overriding issue facing the state of Illinois. It's been there for years. It's called a balanced budget. There's a lot of other things that are issues and concerns, but if you don't have a balanced budget in place, all these other things don't matter, because the state's not going to survive. We need a balanced budget. That means a budget that's going to have cuts and a tax increase. Neither one of those, and I had to do both, neither one of those are popular. That's why you need leaders. And again, I would say, if you come to that point, you're going to want to have a Mike Madigan, because he will deliver. But the four leaders and the governors need to concentrate on the budget, I believe, not on a lot of these other issues. They need to put aside their personal feelings, keep them to themselves. They can tell their wives what they think about the other guy, but they don't need to go out and tell it to the press. And their staffs have to also respect that embargo. It doesn't do you good to have the staff go out and, say these things, and then the principal said, well, I didn't say that. Well, those staffs are extensions of the principals. So they need to do that. Now, let me just say that. Sit down and do the budget. That is going to be an extremely difficult thing. That's what worries me, is if you're going to have a really honest budget, not just a temporary budget, and hopefully something happens someplace, but a real permanent budget that puts this state back on sound fiscal footing, it's going to be a bear of a thing to negotiate. Because what I think's important might not be what you think's important. What I think people ought to be willing to pay, they may not think they're willing to pay. So that is going to have to happen. But that's what they need to concentrate on. And they need to stop all the public rhetoric and deal with that issue. Because, as I tell people, the problem with what's happened the last 2 years, it's not something, all the damage has been done. If you have a budget agreement tomorrow, that's not going to solve all the damage that's been done. It's going to take years to undo the damage that's been done. We have had thousands of young people leave the state to go to other states to get their higher education because they're worried about what's going to happen to higher education in Illinois. Those young people probably won't come back to Illinois. That's the most important economic issue, I think, facing this state, is making sure we have a workforce of the top quality in the future. And if people leave Illinois for higher education purposes, that's, I think, is going to do more economic damage than any of these other things they've been talking about. President Dunn mentioned, when I was governor and I would meet with business leaders, we had trouble with workers' comp. We had trouble with product liability. We had trouble with a lot of issues. But they always said the most important positive thing Illinois had, it had one of the best higher education system in the nation. And they said that was extremely important to them and why they wanted to be in Illinois. They also wanted stability, they wanted continuity, some other things that aren't there now too. But higher education always was one of the first things they raised. So that's why we need a budget. We need it quickly. We need a good, we don't just need any budget, we need a good budget. Now, I will say at this point, maybe we need any budget. But we really need a balanced budget, a budget that provides a way to pay off the debt. It's not going to happen overnight. And one of the things I tell people, maybe the toughest thing is not going to be the taxes, it's not going to be the cuts. It's going to be that the state's going to have to stay on a fiscal diet for several years. And let me tell you, that's going to be the toughest thing to convince the politicians to do. We all want to be loved in politics. And how you get loved? You give people things. You build buildings, you give out money for projects and for grants. And we're not going to be able to do a lot of that in the future. Now, hopefully we can meet our minimum responsibility, which we have not done now for 2 years. But it's not going to be easy. And we're going to have to ask taxpayers to give more money. I mean, I don't think most of them ever noticed that they got a tax cut 2 years ago. Because at the same time that went down in their deductions, or their withdrawals, Social Security had to pay that. And I don't think anybody, I don't know of any legislator ever told me they got a phone call from their constituents thanking them for that, letting that income tax increase expire. I mean, I think that was the most foolish thing. Once the tax is there, people are mad, and you let it go, they're never going to give you credit for that. But they did, and now we're going to have to redo that. And that's all going to be difficult. So, but they got to start having genuine discussions, good faith discussions, not sneaking things to the media about this guy's doing this or that. Just do a blackout and get something done.
Questions? We have microphones that can come to you, and you can answer, you can ask your question of Governor Edgar. Right here up front. Senator Busby.
Thank you. Governor, thank you for your presentation and for your interest and your love for higher education. I, for one, have come to the conclusion that there are some people in this state who have an agenda that they want to do away with a lot of public higher education. And I'll leave unsaid who I think those people are. But I'm curious as to whether you would share that feeling. And secondly, this is a question that I'm asking you to guess about. I was in the House gallery the day that the Senate had passed a bill to extend that tax increase, and it came to the House for a vote, and I sat there and watched and assumed they had the vote, or Madigan would not have called it. It went down, and I was shocked. Do you have any idea why, when they passed that tax increase in the first place, why did they make it temporary? That's my second question. I'm asking you for a guess there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the education, public education, I don't just worry about higher education, public higher education. I worry about public education, period. Because in some ways, I think there's more an assault on elementary and secondary public education, not just in the state, but in the nation, which I always used to point out, I'm the only person ever elected governor of Illinois who is a product of public education in Illinois. From first grade, we didn't have kindergarten back then, from first grade through college. I'm the only person ever elected governor who graduated from a public university in Illinois. So, I have always thought the great common denominator in America is public education. So I get nervous. And now, let's not say public education hasn't messed up and higher education hasn't messed up, and sometimes higher education maybe wastes some money. I think all parts of government waste some money, but I do worry about that we can't ever weaken the ability to have public education from kindergarten through college. That's just what has made this nation what it is, and we need to keep that. Now, saying that, I think there's a lot of people who think that maybe higher education is kind of a luxury more than a necessity. Elementary and secondary think it's a necessity. They also think maybe higher education has wasted money. And I think higher education, really for many years did not face that many cuts. They kind of were the last that had to do with the cuts that other parts of state government had to experience. So I think state higher public education has to look, and you've been doing that, trying to figure out how we can cut back. But that doesn't mean you don't give them a budget. That doesn't mean that 85% of what they're doing isn't well spent and necessary at least. But there are some who didn't come from public higher education. They don't necessarily appreciate public higher education. But I think more the problem is there's just people that thought maybe there was a lot of fat in higher education. And I think in some ways maybe there was areas, but I do think we're well past that now. And at least they ought to give them a budget. If you don't give them 100%, give them 80%, give them something. Okay, back to why the income tax. It was pretty well sealed when Bruce Rauner won, and he said, I think it should expire. And at that point, I don't think the Democrats thought, well, we're going to give this new governor all the resources he needs, but he's not willing to take some of the responsibility, then he's going to beat us over the head. I think if Pat Quinn had won, chances are they would have kept that in place. If Bruce Rauner had not said anything in the campaign about the temporary tax, maybe they might have kept it. Or if he'd have asked him publicly, said, now that, I realize the state's in bad shape, we need to keep that, tax in place. I don't want to raise any more tax and keep it. Then they might have done that. But I think that was the reason that,
My question earlier, that when they first passed the temporary...
they passed. Mike Madigan loves temporary tax. Again, I don't want anybody to walk away thinking Mike Madigan's a saint. He is not. And one of the things that he has really messed up the state on, when he does pass a tax, it's always temporary. Why? And I think it's because you got to come back to him in 2 years or in 4 years. And I had that. When I became governor, he passed the first increase in the income tax, and he'd done it. It was the most amazing legislative feat I'd ever seen. In 3 days, they raised the income tax, but it was temporary, which meant the first thing I had to deal with as the new governor was, do we keep it, make it permanent, or we let it expire? Well, I had run for governor as a Republican saying I wanted to make it permanent. My Democratic opponent, Neil Argan, had run, said he was going to let it expire. We had people so confused in this state, what was going on. And we'd always spin it, and I said I knew we couldn't get along without it. I didn't realize just how bad we were at that point. But Madigan, he wanted to make it temporary again. And that's what the battle I had with Mike Madigan the first year was not over the budget. We really had the budget figured out. It was over, do we make the temporary tax permanent, or do we make it temporary again? And I said to him, I don't want to go through this every 2 years. This is nuts. It's terrible fiscal policy, too. People need to know they're going to have that money. And so if you remember, the temporary tax that time was half was for education, half was for local government. That was how they took care of Mayor Daley, who was the new mayor and needed help. That's what he did. So the compromise that Madigan and I finally reached that year, and I knew I wanted some of that local government money. State government really didn't get any of that money. But I needed it. State was broke. And I knew with Medicaid and things like that, I needed it. And so the compromise we finally worked was, Madigan said, he was mad at Daley. Daley had tried to work around him, which you don't do either. And so he said, I'll deal with you. He said, I said, well, I got to have it permanent for education at least. He said, all right, I'll give it to you permanent for education. We'll make it temporary for local government. And Mayor Daley had to come back to the speaker, see? And I said, all right, because at that point we were 20 days without a budget, and we were about at the point where people, in fact, a few people in higher education had not got their paycheck a few days before. We were at the point where I thought, as governor, I've got to get this resolved. I'm responsible making the state work, and we've got to get this resolved. And so I said, all right, we'll do the local government temporary, because I wanted some of that money anyway, and we'll make education permanent, and we did. And 2 years later, we made it permanent for local government, but I got part of it for state government. So it really worked out very well. But Mike loves this temporary stuff, and I think he likes it because you have to come back to him. And he especially enjoyed having the mayor have to come back to him for 2 years. You forget, people always, we love downstairs, there's a Chicago machine. It's not monolithic. Rich Daley never told Mike Madigan what to do. Now, his dad, the original Mayor Daley, used to tell the Democratic leaders what to do, but that's changed. Mayor Daley never could tell Mike Madigan. He could ask him, and often he would do it, but he had to ask him. Same thing today. The current mayor cannot tell Speaker Madigan what to do, contrary to what you might hear out there from some people. They're independent operatives. Now, you know, they can work out a deal once in a while among themselves, but there isn't that monolithic democratic machine like there was under the original Mayor Daley.
Other questions? Right here, okay, up front.
I've been very active in the issues of pensions and retirement and benefits as you retire from the state university retirement system. I often get people come up to me and ask the question, should I retire? And we go through, what about this, how many years, et cetera, are you tier 1, tier 2, et cetera, et cetera. And I come up basically with the answer that yes, you should retire if you can, because those of us already retired are protected in what we get. The Constitution protects us. We've taken the state to the Supreme Court twice, and we've won both those cases. So if you are retired, you're better protected in this fiscal nightmare we live in than if you're not retired. Do you agree or do you disagree?
No, I agree. I think when they originally passed that proposal about 3 years ago, they were going to cut into the benefits. I said, well, whether it's right or wrong, it's clearly unconstitutional. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I read the constitutional papers and the debate. And the reason that provision was put in there was exactly to prevent happening what was happening. And it was very clear. And I never understood Speaker Madigan, who was part of the CONCON and was well aware of that, was one of the leaders of that effort to pass that bill. So was the Chicago Tribune, so was the Republican League. I mean, it was a bipartisan effort, but it was clearly unconstitutional, even if you didn't like that, and that was part of the problem. That was there. So no, I think that the Constitution was pretty clear, and the Supreme Court was even clearer in their decision. I mean, I was amazed at how adamant they were in that decision. I really thought health care might be in play, and they were adamant on that, and you knew then, and I've heard the then Chief Justice say later, well, it's pretty obvious, you read the Constitution, what they meant. So, no, I think that's true, and I think it's there. And again, the pension thing is an extremely difficult issue. We had put in place, when I was governor, a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a plan which we hadn't had before. We were starting to put money in every year. When I left office, pension funds were funded at the highest percent they've ever been funded at. It was working. It's going to take 30 years, but it was working. And it also reassured the financial community that we had a plan in place. Unfortunately, then we did early retirement, then we did a few other things after I left that really put a lot of pressure on that. And then the stock market, which is part of the dilemma you can't control, because a lot of that money is invested in stocks, and the stock market went down, though it's come back. But we got off the discipline we put into place. Now, was it going to be tough down the road? Yes, it was going to be tough. But everybody knew it was coming. And to Pat Quinn's credit, when he was governor, he made those payments. And they were big payments, bigger than I had to make. They had more monies, but he made them. And he stuck with that. And it's unfortunate that we got off track before and that we didn't stay on track. And it's going to take several years to pay that off. It's not going to get paid off overnight. And now I've argued with actuaries, and there might be some in the audience, I'm not an actuary, but I don't think we need 100% money in there, because we're not going to have everybody retire at the same time. Now I know actuaries like to have that, but I think if we could get it to 80, 85%, we'd be in good shape. Now we're far from that, but to get it there, and we got to stop adding any, and the legislature, to their credit, has stopped adding any more of those benefits. And in fact, I worry now that they've cut those benefits back, that new people who come into state government are going to stay. I think most of you who've worked in state government, at least me, I started out, I never thought about my pension when I started out. I wanted to work in state government. But I stayed in state government later on because I was thinking about my pension. It wasn't the salary I was getting paid, but we did have good benefits. I could have gone out in the private sector and made a lot more money, but I thought, I do have some good benefits that I don't have to go out and make a lot of money because I can have a reasonable retirement. And also, a lot of folks who aren't in government don't understand. State workers have paid their part of this. Those figured out actuarially how much they should pay and how much the state ought to pay. They pay it. They continue to pay it, even when the state didn't pay it. So state workers did their part. Government didn't do their part, meaning the elected officials. And I'll take part of the blame. I mean, my first 3 years, we were broke. We didn't put any money into that. We tried to correct that and began to turn that around. People say, well, would you do it different? I said, the only thing I'd do different on the pension and on any major thing, I left $1.5 billion surplus. That was a mistake. They spent that within 6 months when I left. And we didn't have what, the guy that invented the internet.
Al Gore?
Al Gore. Al Gore, when he ran against George W. Bush, he was talking about that lockbox. It's going to create a lockbox. Well, we didn't have that turned back when I was governor, but I wish we'd had a lockbox. Or what I wish I'd have done is taken that $1.5 billion and put it into the pension thing. Because I would have never dreamed the legislature, after what we went through in the early 90s, was going to go through that money within 6 months. I didn't think the governor, but unfortunately the governor was really a legislator at heart, and they like to spend money. And that was gone, and I wish now I'd have put that in the pension fund or created that lockbox that Al Gore talked about later and left it there, because they had the opportunity to deal with that. We also, remember, we got a tobacco windfall of well over $1 billion. That disappeared. I mean, I don't know where that went. But again, there are things they could have done to prepare themselves for that increase that was going to happen in 10 years, or take a look and see if there's another way to revise it. They just kind of pushed it aside, and then we had a crisis. And unfortunately, I think a realistic solution has kind of been out of, they got carried away on trying to figure out how to solve this.
Got time for one or two questions? One more? Okay, over here.
Governor Edgar, I want to echo everybody here. Thank you for coming here and speaking with us. My question is related to redistricting. This past year, the Illinois Supreme Court struck down a ballot initiative at the very beginning because it found it unconstitutional. There was a very adamant dissent by 3 dissenting justices that found that the result of that case eliminated any other ballot initiative, something unique to the Illinois Constitution. The next governor is most likely going to preside over redistricting, and he's going to vote either for the redistricting plan or against it. What are your views on what Illinoisans should look for and maybe get behind when the next redistricting comes around?
Well, I think there'll be another attempt on the constitutional amendment, or do the ballot initiative, which they've struck down for constitutional reasons. I'm not a lawyer. Now, Mike Lawrence isn't either, but he is a jailhouse lawyer over the years. And he actually also, he used to always advise me when he was my press secretary on legal matters. And he's pretty good, pretty good. And he told me all along that the way they redrafted that initiative, they were going to have trouble. and I was involved in it, and I'm very supportive of it. I used to not like that idea because I don't know if there is such a thing as nonpartisan redistricting, but it's obvious the current plan doesn't work. I mean, this goes back to ComCon. They came up with that tiebreaker, and I thought that's novel, and I thought that would, and it did work the first time. People forget, in 1971, it did cause the legislature to compromise on redistricting, and we had a map that was pretty even. That's the only time. Other than that, they've gone to the draw, and one party's controlled, and so it's made the map very lopsided one way or the other, and made districts strange. I mean, we used to have a congressional district in Springfield. You'd tee off at this golf course, and you'd tee off and you'd go through 3 congressional districts. I mean, so it was obvious that wasn't working. And so I agreed last time. I supported the idea to do the ballot initiative. And I hope there's some way they can draft it in a way that the courts might approve it. Now, saying that, and the Supreme Court, you never forget they're elected. We don't have an appointed judiciary like most states. We have elected Supreme Court, and they're elected on partisan ballots. So there's a little bit of that in there, though they claim it's not. And in most cases it's not, but this is a tough issue for them to overlook. And I would hope that if it would come up again, it could get on the ballot. If it got on the ballot, it would pass 80% easy. I mean, the public is convinced this is a bunch of politicians, they want to change it. It's like when they did away with the cumulative voting. You're going to get rid of politicians. So I think it would pass, maybe not always for the right reason, but it would pass. And I think, hopefully, it would be an improvement. If it doesn't pass, then I suspect we're going to go through what we've gone through the last 3 decades. We'll probably go to a draw, and one party's going to control it over the other. Or you have one party that controls both the governor and the legislature, and the governor would sign his party's map. And trust me, whether it's Republican or Democrat, they both will be very slanted to their way. This is not, Democrats aren't evil, Republicans aren't righteous this last time, it's just Democrats had control, so they did the dirty deed. If the Republicans had control, they would have done it too. I'll never forget, the first drawing, I was the Secretary of State. I'd just been appointed Secretary of State, and I had to draw a name out of the hat. And first of all, the Democrats were convinced I was going to rig the draw. And I decided, there's no precedent for this, so I said, well, let's get Lincoln's hat. That'll make it look extremely honest. And we got one of Lincoln's stove hat. And I remember the Democrats showed up that day, and they sat right behind me because they were convinced I was going to rig it. I was going to put out the Republican name. Now, I wasn't going to do that. First of all, everybody would think it was rigged, and I was trying to run for office. That wasn't going to be good. And I wasn't going to do that anyway. That's not fair. That's not honest. So I remember Jim Donovan, who was one of the Democratic leaders for his state treasurer. He was sitting behind me, keeping an eye out, and he was a very reasonable guy, but he was convinced I was going to rig it, steal it. Well, I pulled the name out, and the 2 names were Sam Shapiro and Bill Stratton, the 2 former governors, Republican and Democrat. One was going to be the tiebreaker. I draw out Sam Shapiro's name. I remember I looked at that before I said it, and I thought to myself, well, 1, it shows I'm honest. 2, I've just destroyed the Republican Party. Because the Democrats are now going to keep control of this process. And Pate Phillip, who was the Republican leader, was mad at me for years, thinking I should have figured out a way to pull out Bill Stratton's name. So it was one of those. But unfortunately, I think we'll probably go back in that again, which is not the best way to do this. And you have funny-looking districts. You have lopsided districts that don't really represent the partisan makeup of the state. The state is a little more closer than those districts would demonstrate. But short of this ballot initiative being approved by a Supreme Court that's been elected partisan, I think that's what we're faced with. And there is the feeling among the Democrats, they control this process. They've done pretty well. Now, if next time you have a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, and it goes to the draw, the Secretary of State draws out a Republican name, they lose that. But right now, they kind of like this system, so they're not excited about that change. One more thing about what can make government better in Illinois? You didn't ask me this, but this was one of my pet things, and I always like to talk about it. Redistricting is very important, but even more important, if we want to make politics work in Illinois, if we want to be assured on Election Day we have good choices, vote in primaries. That's where most elections are solved, unfortunately. And particularly with this redistricting problem, because those districts are drawn in such a way they're very Republican or they're very Democrat. So whoever wins the primary is going to win the general election. So if people don't vote in the primary, they're going to get stuck on Election Day with somebody they may not want. I hear people say, I don't like the candidates. Well, I said, did you vote in the primary? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to declare what I am. Well, I'd like to have where we didn't have to publicly declare, but we do. But so what? Democracy's at stake. Your government's future is at stake. Your state's future is at stake. Vote in the primary. I'm convinced most Illinoisans are someplace in the middle. They're not to the far right, they're not to the far left. They probably agree on a lot of things, some Republicans and Democrats, but unfortunately, all those folks don't vote in the primary. We get the true believers, both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, show up, and God bless them. I used to get beat up by the far right all the time when I ran, but I respected the fact they showed up. And usually when we have primaries, terrible. We have primaries way too early in Illinois. We ought to be like most states and have it in the summer. We have it in the winter when most people don't want to go out. That's a help incumbents. That's why that's that way. But vote in the primary. You vote in the primary, pick reasonable people in the primary, so on Election Day you have choices, and those people get elected, and then maybe they're reasonable people in the legislature who can work with other reasonable people across the aisle because they've been selected by the people in the middle, and we might get some things done. But if we keep polarizing politics, both at the national and state level now, we're going to have stalemate in government, and democracy is not going to work. And we're going to have these extremes that you're going to say, how did we get those people? Well, probably because you didn't vote in the primary. Okay? That's my preaching for tonight.
I think the choir hears you.
Yeah.
One more question over here.
Probably this group I don't have to talk about voting in the primary, but you know.
So we've seen nationally a very polarized nation. Do you think that some of the problems in Illinois came before that and were indicative of the way the country was heading, or do you think that perhaps the polarization is what has led to this now 22-month budget impasse?
We always had our differences in Illinois. I never thought we were as polarized in Illinois as they were nationally. I think the last 20 years we've seen the federal government much more polarized. There's much more, hatred. I mean, Democrats did it toward Bush, Republicans did it toward Clinton, then Democrats really did it toward George W., and then Republicans really did it toward Barack Obama. And a lot of folks are doing it toward Trump. But, we saw that polarization. We had not seen that in Illinois, really. I don't think. The problems we had with Blagojevich was among Democrats. I mean, they disliked him as much as the Republicans. I mean, it wasn't a partisan thing. I do think in the last few years, we've seen the Washington-style partisanship, negative partisanship, come to Illinois. We brought too many people from outside the state in, too many consultants, too many people in positions that's how they did it, nationally or in maybe some other states. And as a result, it's always been a blood sport in Illinois. I don't want to kid you. Running for governor was the most difficult thing I ever went through in my life. But still, there was the ability after the election, it seemed like, that we could sit down and finally resolve it. And what we saw at the national level, that didn't happen, and we've seen that now begin to happen in Springfield, and that's unfortunate. And, I don't know what the answer is. Maybe different people. That takes elections. More people voting in primary, getting a little more reasonable people there. But it has happened in the last few years in Illinois. We're much more like the national scene, and that's unfortunate. I wish I could end on a more uplifting note. Well, like the uplifting note, the Simon Institute is great. Paul Simon did a great job with, and followed by Mike and David. And of course, we expect that from Paul. Paul was a great guy. Even if you didn't agree with him on issues, he was just a great human being. And you folks here who have supported the Simon Institute with your dollars and participation, this university who's been very supportive of this institution, you should feel good. This is a great resource you have here in Southern Illinois. You never want to lose it. You want to just make sure the next 20 years is even better than the last 20 years. And I've been very pleased that they've invited me down a few times to take part in it. I'm envious of what you've been able to do down here. I wish I lived closer to Carbondale. I wish you were closer to Springfield so I could get to some of these programs you have. But this is just a great thing, and make sure you continue to support it, and thank you for making this a reality.
Thank you, Governor, and making this a very special evening. Thank you so much, Governor.